Great read today, A Man for All Seasons. It's a play by Robert Bolt and something that I've read with in classes and had discussions on this one in conjunction with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They're great to read and discuss together because they're both short. It's a modern play. Robert Bolt actually authored a couple other plays, screenplays, Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia. And this Man for All Seasons is the true story of Sir Thomas More, who died for his beliefs. And so a main theme in this play is the idea of conscience and being true to your conscience and doing what you know is right no matter the cost, because Thomas More died for his beliefs. And it's interesting because Robert Bolt was not a really religious individual, and yet his most famous works were Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia really have a lot that same theme of conscience and going against your conscience and doing things that you know you shouldn't do and what the consequences of that are, and the inner human battle, the human condition about right and wrong is something that Robert Bolt talks a lot about. So it might be interesting as well. Not only is this a play in written form that's really great to just read, it's in movie form, and I've had many people find it online. I got it from the library. It's well done. They just recorded a kind of a movie, playish movie. It's good, and it follows the play really closely. And then you could compare it. You could do a Robert Bolt theme day or something like that, and you could watch those other two movies and kind of think about what's he about, what's he thinking and talking about. You could read this one and then watch it together with your book group or your family, or watch some of the other movies as well by him. I don't know, lots of things you could do, but the play is a great read. And one of the things that Robert Bolt says that he did, which I love, he says, I was guaranteed some beauty and form by incorporating passages from Sir Thomas More himself. For the rest, my concern was to match with these as best I could so that the theft should not be too obvious. He read some of Thomas More's writings and quotes him often throughout the play. So the language is more beautiful that way, like he says, and he tries to match it as best he can in the other characters to kind of make it true to the time period and true to Sir Thomas More and to the people that were close to him. And I like that about it too. That makes it more real and authentic and more beautiful. They're really I have probably 5, 6, 7 of my favorite quotes are from this play. And it's often when Thomas More is talking, and I would bet that some of them are his own words. This is the time in English history when Henry VIII couldn't have children, I can't remember the whole story of where his children came from, but he wanted to divorce because he wanted an heir. And so he did away with he tried to do away with Catholicism in England, and that's where the Church of England originated. Then incorporated some Catholic rituals and beliefs, but made divorce legal. He was able to get the Pope's support at one point for this change. And so the problem was that he kept changing the deal, and Thomas More disagreed with what he was doing and why he was doing it. At first he said that he wanted to cleanse the church, And he and Thomas More actually wrote, so this is the same time as Martin Luther and the Reformation in Germany. And he put his 95 Theses up on the door and said, there's corruption in the church, right? And Thomas More disagreed with Martin Luther. And this is another thing that would be very valuable in a discussion of this play, is to look at Martin Luther's life and Thomas More's life and compare, because they're two men obviously of conscience. And they're two men who feel that there are things wrong with the Catholic Church, but the way they go about doing what they do is completely different, and they're diametrically opposed. Like, they're both saying, no, I'm right and I'm following my conscience, and yet they're doing different things. Maybe that's circumstantial, maybe our consciences tell us to do different things at different times. Whatever the case might be, it's very worth discussing and thinking through. So when Martin Luther put the 95 Theses up, and over here, now we're in England, Thomas More finds out about that. He and Henry VIII write Defense of the Seven Sacraments to repudiate Luther. And that's really interesting. They were on the same page. They were really united as far as some of those things went. And then Sir Thomas More doesn't want to... He could see the value of trying to kind of cleanse the church, and he could kind of go along with that, and he could see the value of trying to gain an heir. But when it came around to the second divorce, Thomas More didn't want to have anything to do with it. And the king comes to him at one point and visits him at his home, and he's like, I gotta have your support, you gotta tell me that what I'm doing is okay. And and he says, I shouldn't have married this woman. I've got to divorce her because it wasn't right when I did it. And Thomas More's like, you can't just... He doesn't say this to the king, but the idea is, you can't just keep flipping sides. You can't just keep changing your mind. You can't just say, this is what I'm about, and then change your mind and want me to keep going along with it. Later on, what really got him in trouble and got him put in prison was that he would not take the oath in support. He wouldn't swear to the act of succession. So later, as Henry VIII went through different wives, 2 or 3, I can't remember how many times, he put together acts of succession. So who would succeed him as king? So he wanted to say, okay, now scrap that. It's not going to be that wife's child. It's this new wife's kid that's going to succeed me now. And he just kept wanting to change the deal, and Thomas More was like, no, this is not right. And I can't swear to something that I feel deep down inside is wrong. One of the reasons why it really mattered to the king was because, not just because Sir Thomas More was high up in the government and he was well known because of his governmental position, but the other reason was that Sir Thomas More was an undersheriff for a handful of years, and that meant that he interacted with the poor and the lower class quite a bit, and they knew him. And he was known to be impartial in his judgments, because they would do these kind of mini courts and try to help justice happen among the lower class. And so he was known to be very fair and a patron of the poor. So people would go and plead to him for financial help, and he would often help them. And so it was the poor, average people that knew who he was and respected him and respected his opinion. So it made it even a bigger deal that he wasn't supporting what the king was doing. And that's why the king was like, you've got to go along with what I'm saying here. Eventually he was imprisoned. He wouldn't take the oath, and so he was put to death. Richard Rich played a part in that. Cromwell, you get to know them. They're real people. Look them up online. Learn a little bit about them. It really makes the story even more interesting because it's history, but it's a play, which makes it all dialogue and very, very quick and easy to read. But very profound ideas to talk about. Another theme that I would suggest you discuss is law. it comes out a handful of times because he's an attorney and he keeps saying, no, the law's on my side, the law's on my side. I can't be found guilty and put to death because I'm obeying the law. Well, the king was the law. This whole idea about rule of law was still coming into play. It was still becoming a more and more popular idea, this idea of democracy and all men are equal and the king should be below the law. This has a long English history coming forward, and at this point in time, the king was still the law. Silence is used. That's an interesting thing to talk about. I'll give you one quote that's one of my favorites. He's in prison, and they let his family come and visit him so that they'll try to talk him into taking the oath so that he'll live. And his daughter and his wife were really upset. So his wife says, God more regards the thoughts of the heart than the words of the mouth, or so you've always told me. So just go ahead and say what they want you to say, because God knows you don't really believe it, and God knows that what your thoughts and what your heart are. And Moore says, yes. Then Margaret says, then say the words of the oath in your heart and think otherwise. Say the words of the oath and in your heart think otherwise. Then Moore says, what is an oath then but words we say to God? And Margaret's like, well, that's very neat. And he says, well, what do you mean? And she says, no, it's true. Then Moore says, then it's a poor argument to call it neat, Meg. Oh, I'm sorry. Meg is his daughter. He's talking to his daughter, Margaret. When a man takes an oath, Meg, he's holding his own self in his own hands, like water. He cups his hands. And if he opens his fingers then, he needn't hope to find himself again. Some men aren't capable of this, but I'd be loath to think your father one of them. And so love is another theme in conjunction with the idea of conscience, because he believes that he's loving himself, most of all loving God and loving his family in the actions that he's taking. And if he doesn't follow his conscience, he will have no soul. His soul, what he says he is and what he says he stands for, will fall through his fingers like water. And he will lose his own identity of who he is. So look for this idea about who we are, who we really are, what's the essence of who we are, and what it has to do with conscience and law and love, because those are really beautiful themes that this play brings forward and allows us to think and discuss. Enjoy. We'll see you next time.